Hey guys, Justin here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a simple tutorial for us and we are going to make a counter using React. But not only just any counter, because I know there's probably about 1,000 counter tutorials on YouTube alone. So the way that I'm going to distinguish myself, the way that this counter app is gonna be a little different is one, we're gonna be using hooks. All of this is done with hooks. No class-based components here, just functional components and hooks. And the hooks that we are looking at specifically is useState and useEffect. Now, I'm gonna show you the little bit of the nuances of these hooks. So hopefully this will be a good tutorial for you guys to learn about those stuff. So not only that, we got a little bit of quote unquote complicated things going on here that is a little bit more complex than the more simpler counter apps that you see on YouTube. For example, you do the obvious like counting up and down. You could also reset, right? But one thing different about this is, let's say I'm on 20 right now, right? Normally, if you refresh the page, you will go back to 0, but mine stays at 20. I don't know if you saw that. I'm refreshing my page like 100 times right now. It still stays at 20, meaning it saves the progress you're in. Not only that, we have this input right here where we could type in any number, maybe 121. We update it, and now that gets updated too. We also have this thing where we have a timer here. So let's see what happens if I click this. Notice right now it says start timer, but if I click, it says stop timer, and look at the number here. It's going up, and then we could stop it and it will stop going up. So my goal is to make this, and I'll try to do my very best to explain this in the simplest terms as possible. So if you're a newcomer, don't be scared. We'll go through this together. And by the way, if this is your first time at my channel, I make tutorial videos like this on a pretty consistent basis. So if you like my content, please click like and subscribe below. You will continually find React tutorial videos, JavaScript tutorial videos, anything related to coding, you will find it here on this channel. All right, guys, let's get started. All right, so I have my terminal open here on my IDE. And guys, by the way, it doesn't matter what IDE you use. I just use WebStorm here. I'm on an empty folder right now. So guys, the first thing first, make sure you have Node installed just to make sure to see if you have Node installed or not. Just do node -- version and make sure you get a version here. If you don't, then let me see. Go to nodejs.org and just download one of these and go to the process, and you should have Node installed. All right, so I'm assuming that most of you guys do have Node installed. So once you are at an empty folder, I called my folder counter. What I'm gonna do is npx create React app. Now, usually the next word is the name of your app that you're making. However, I just want to call it counter, and that's the empty folder that I'm on right now. So I'll just say make it here in this current directory by putting a dot, and then press enter, and this will lead you to the process of the whole installation process. So I'm probably gonna pause the video here and come back when this is all done. All right, so mine has just finished installing, and I know that because it says here, happy hacking, done. And for me, it says here to do this, cd go into this folder, and then yarn start. But that's only because I have yarn installed. For you, if you don't have yarn installed, which is fine, you will say npm start here. They're both the same thing. And if you open up your folder now, you should see a bunch of folders like so. And what we're interested in is a source folder. So this is where we're gonna be spending all of our time in. Now, let's just follow the directions for now. Open up your terminal and let's write npm start. So then your browser should open like so. It's loading. It's compiling our code right now. Let me just make the sizing a little bit better on our screen. All right, so this is what you should see here. So if you see this, you're on the right track. But we want to get rid of some of these files that we don't need. So let's start erasing the ones we don't need. So for example, I see this app.test.js here. We don't need that. Let's get rid of that. I also see logo.svg, serviceworker.js, and setup.test.js. So let's get rid of these three. The rest we're gonna keep. Now our app's gonna break, which is fine. Let's go to our index.js. Let me just zoom in a little bit. We don't need the service worker down here, so erase that. And we don't need the import anymore. So we're gonna keep our index.js like so, and we're not gonna touch this any longer. We're gonna spend all of our time in app.js. Let me zoom in for you guys. But before we go on, let's erase our import logo. We don't need our logo anymore. Now, within this return method here, we don't need all of this. We just want the outer div. So let's erase all of that. And I'm just going to write hello from app just to see if that appears. Yes, that is appearing. Now, you could do this if you want. It's completely optional. I don't like how my hello from app is way up at the top. So I want to give it a little bit of margin. So I'm going to go into app.css. And within our app class right here, I'm just going to put margin top maybe 50 pixels. Yeah, that's good enough for me. So this is optional. And this is not a styling course. This is just purely on React hooks. So please bear with me that the app is not the prettiest thing, but I think it'll be fine. All right, so let's do this. So the first thing we're going to do is let's display a h1 tag here with a number. We'll initialize it as 0. So let's try this. I'm going to put a h1 tag here. And let's just put the number 0. And we got this big old 0 here just to make sure everything's working. Let me try updating this with using 1. And it works. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's just make 3 buttons here. You could make a button tag like so. And the first one I'm going to call -1. I'm going to copy this, paste it 2 more times, make the next one reset, and make the next one +1. Let's see what we have now. Yeah, so we got this thing going on. And as a matter of fact, why don't we just put these 3 buttons in a div? Just so that we could separate whatever else we decide to add in later, like so. All right, so obviously these buttons don't do anything because we didn't tell it to do anything. Not only that, this h1 right here, this number that we see 1, is not dynamic. We can't physically change it because we physically wrote down the number 1 here, right? So this is where state comes in. So with functional components, with hooks, we have this method from React that we got to import first. So up at the very top, let's put comma and let's import useState. So this is how we introduce states in a functional component with this useState hook. Whenever you see a function that starts with the word use, it's most likely a hook. So this is a hook. And what states are pretty much, they're pretty much like variables that you could update in your React components. So that's what we need right now. We need a variable that we can update, right? So we're going to introduce state to this functional component. Now, there is a standard way of how to define or how to make state variables using this useState hook. But let me just show you guys what the output of this is, okay? So let's just do this. Const what is this is equal to useState. Now, what useState is a function. What that takes as a parameter is the initial state, the initial value of your state. In our case, maybe we want to initialize this as either 0 or 1. Let's say 0, right? So I'm just going to put a 0 inside the parentheses. This is the initial value of our state. Now, I've intentionally made this what is this because I want us to see what this is. So I'm going to console log what is this and put what is this to see what this shape is all about, what we get back. So I'm going to open up my terminal, and right here we have an array. We have an array with the first 0th index as a 0, and the first index is some type of a function. And let's see what happens if we update this initial value to 32, for example. Now you see that the 0th index has a 32 value, and the first one is still a function. So pretty much, this useState hook always gives you back an array of 2 items. And so if one thing that we always do in the standard way of doing things is we destructure those 2 things that we get back from this useState. The first one is always the variable itself, the value itself, the state, in other words, which let's call our state counter. Yeah, counter seems appropriate. And the next one, the function that you see here, is the function that updates our state, in this case, our counter variable. So the standard way of naming this is just to use the word set and put your variable name. So in our case, it will be set and then capital C counter, like so. So we have destructured these 2 values now. So this is a standard way of using the useState. Now, let's put, instead of hard coding the number 1 into our h1 tag, let's put our counter. So the way that you do that is you put these curly braces and you put the counter like so. Now you see this 32. Granted, our -1 plus 1 still doesn't work, right? So let's take care of these one at a time. So to take care of this, we gotta give an on-click event to all of our buttons. Let's start with the +1. And an on-click event prop accepts a function inside, and we could pretty much tell it to do whatever it wants. In our case, we want to make a function that doesn't have an input parameter, but the output of it is using our set counter. What is a set counter? Remember, we got it from our second function. This is what we use to, is a function that updates this variable here. And we're going to set the value to just counter +1. We're essentially saying, oh, just add 1 to it. Let me just put some space here to make it a little bit more presentable, like so. All right, and let me close this. We don't need that on the left side. So now let's see if that works. I do +1 and it keeps on going up. So that is working. So what, again, we have passed it a function. Like, notice we didn't give it the what it's supposed to do like this. This is what it's supposed to do, but we actually pass it a function, because if you just do this right here, then it just updates it whenever it renders. So it actually doesn't work. So we always have to pass a function to our on clicks like so. Now let's do the same thing for our -1. Let me just copy this line right here. Let's put some space here. I'll put an on click, but accept counter -1 like so. Now let's see if that works here. And yep, it works. And reset is pretty easy as well. Let me just put some space here. And what we want to do is we don't want to set counter based upon the previous counter, but we just want to set it as 0, right? So that's what we have to do. Keep on going, and we reset, and that works. All right, so that's looking pretty good so far. Now, notice we have a bit of a duplicate code here. You know, they're doing similar things, but you know, we have manually defined these functions. We have manually defined these functions inline within the button itself. So the normal way how we handle this duplicate code to keep our code a little bit more dry is we define a method within this function. So what we can call this is, how about this? Const, let's define a method called set, how about set counter with value. And we will pass a value along like so. And we will just set counter with the value that we have passed on. What can we do now? So now, instead of having the set counter here, what we can do is update this with set counter with value. And we can do counter plus -1 here. And here with 0. And here with +1. Now, probably most of you guys are thinking this actually looks longer than before, which is very true. And this is probably, you don't want to do this because we just have made our code a little bit longer and we added this method here. But if you want to shorten this, what we can do is, notice we're passing in a function that calls another function inside each of these buttons here, right? You could know that by, we have this arrow function here. So to redo this, why don't we just add this to our method here? So the way that we're going to do that is, after our value, we're going to add another parameter, another function, like so. And because for value, we only have one parameter, we could get rid of parentheses. So what this does is pretty much, we are going to call these methods here, erase those arrows. So what this does is, we are passing in a reference to a function into these on clicks. What is the set counter with value? It is with the value parameter here, then that is a function. So if we didn't have this part right here, let's say we erase that, right? Then it wouldn't work. We re-render constantly, because when this renders, when this component renders, it's calling the function right away. That's not what we want. We want to pass a reference to a function. So that's why we need to do a little bit of this complicated stuff here. So now it's working like normal. And I think now it's safe to say our code looks a little bit more cleaner. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to make a little input field here where we could type in a number, and when we click update, another button here, it will update this value with whatever input value we have typed in here. So let's try doing that. Remember this div that we have with the 3 buttons? I'm gonna make another div just for our input and the button associated with it. So, and I don't think I need that anymore. All right, so we are going to do input, closing tag, and also a button with the word update. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, we got our input field here and an update button that doesn't do anything so far. Now, the way that we handle inputs in React is we want to make it what's called a controlled input. What that means is right now, let's say I type something in here, right? Let's say I typed in hello. This component, this functional component that we have made right here, he has no idea what we typed. There is no way, I mean, there is a way to be honest, but we want him to be fully in control with the value that gets typed in here. So the way that we do that is we connect its value to one of our state variables, which we will make. And also, whenever we type something, we put an onChange event handler into this input so that whenever we update it, we're actually updating our variable itself. So let's introduce a new state here, which we will call input val. And then the next one is going to be set input val, which we will use useState on. And the initial value that this input value is going to have is what is there usually initially in an input? There's nothing there, right? So we're going to initialize it as an empty string like so. And now we're going to tell our input to only read the value from this variable here, from this state here. And the way that we do that is we give it a value prop and we give it the input val here. So let's see if this works. Instead of making this an empty string, how about we put hello here? Yeah. So I'm getting a couple errors here. Yeah, let's just ignore this for now. We'll get to it soon. But notice now it says hello. But the problem is now I tried typing something here. I'm typing madly right now. Nothing happens. It's because we didn't give a onChange event handler. And that's what we're going to do right now. So let's do this. Where were we? Input value. Let's give it an onChange. And we're going to pass in a function like the onClicks before. And what we're going to do is, by the way, let's extract this function out, kind of like what we did with this one here. Let's do this. Const on input handle input change. How about that? Handle input change. And whenever we associate an onChange, we will always get back this event, which E for short, as a parameter. And let's just console log what that E is all about. And to associate this onChange with the method that we just defined, let's put the handle input change here. Remember, don't put the parentheses here because that means you're calling the function. We don't want to call the function here. By the way, the reason why we put parentheses here is because we had to give it a parameter, the value specifically. But the result of calling that function is it gives you back another function. That's why it was okay. Here, we got this crazy arrow to an arrow going on. But here, we have a standard function going on. So that's why we can't put a parentheses here. We're console logging the E when we onChange something. And notice we're getting the synthetic event stuff. So you don't really have to know what this is all about. The only thing we're interested in is the e.target.value. This will give you the value of our string of our input here. So if I write S here, now we get hellos. If I write D here, I get D. The reason why we didn't get SD is because it's not keeping track of the previous state. We got to update our state in order to keep track of the previous inputs. So the way that we do that is we just set our input val. Remember, that's the second part of the hook here with e.target.value. Now, let's think about what this does, yeah? So we reload the page, and let's erase this from hello to an empty string again. We reload the page, the component mounts, and then inside the input, it first reads what this input variable is, Right now it's an empty string, so it displays the empty string. Now, when I type something, it goes into this method handler here, handle input change, updates our variable with whatever I've typed in right here, and then that in turn displays that value within this value prop here, and the cycle continues. So this is an example of a controlled input. We have successfully made this input a controlled input by giving the value with one of our state variables and an onChange event handler that updates our state. Okay? So now this is working as intended. Now React knows what we type in. And where does he know it? He knows it in our input val variable. So if we console log that, look down here, we type whatever, he has access to what we have typed in. So that is good. Let's erase this console log for now. Now let's take care of this update button. So I'm gonna put an onClick event handler here, and how about we're gonna make another method here, which we will call handle update via input. How about that? So I'm gonna copy that word here, make another method here called handle update via input, and we don't need any parameters here. Technically, onClick event handlers also pass an E event, but we don't need to use it, so I'm not gonna define that here. And by the way, since we only have one parameter here, we could just get rid of these parentheses. And within our handle update via input, what do we want to do? How about this? We want to, whatever the value of the input val was, we want to update the counter with it, right? So we could do just set counter with input val. Let's see if that works. So I type maybe 1, 2, 3, I update, it appears to work. Now, one thing that's not a good user experience is we probably want to empty this field right after, right? But that's not the only issue. That's pretty easy to solve, but let's try doing +1 after that, right? If I click this, we should see 124, but if I do, we get 1, 2, 3, 1. And then we just get this nonsense going on. Oh, but now it works. When we do minus, it works. So let me show you guys again. I write 101 here. If I do minus, it works as intended. Do you see? But if I try using the plus, it does this nonsense here. So the reason why this is happening is inputs are always of the string type. So this input val right here is a string. So we are setting this counter, which is a number type, as a string. Now the reason why the minus works is because if you do a string number minus an actual number, it comes back to as a number. But if you do plus, the default way behavior is it just adds to your string with the 1. Does that make sense? So let's remember also the other issue was we want to reset whatever we have wrote here when we click the update, right? So the way that we do that is after we set the counter, let's just do set input val back as an empty string. Now to handle this not being a string, the easy solution is just to put number of input val like so. That will convert this string into a number type. So let's see if that works. So 3, 2, 1. So that's working. We do +1, and that is now working too. Also notice our input field has gone away, which is good. But now we got a couple problems. So what if I write hello here and I update? We get this not a number. So we want to somehow make sure that the user only types in numbers here, and when we click update, that it will only work if this was a number right here. So the way that we do that is within our handle update via input, let me extract the course for the number of input val right here. We'll do this const value is equal to number. So we are coursing this string into a number. Now, if it isn't a proper number that's typed into the string, we will always get this NaN, not a number. So we can do this if you might think you could do this like if value is triple equals to not a number, then do nothing, otherwise do something, right? But I'm getting this yellow squiggly line here from WebStorm, and it's saying equality comparison with not a number always evaluates the false. So this is not how you check to see if a value is not a number or not, or a NaN value or not. The way that you check is NaN. If value is NaN, then we will go here, but sorry, I need a capital, NaN. Then we'll go inside here. And what do we want to do if the value is not a number? How about we just set the input val to an empty and we don't do anything. Else, now we are dealing with the proper number. Then we will do set counter with value and then set input val back as an empty string, like so. So now let's see if that works. I write 111, 11, and that seems to work. Everything went away. How about if I write hello, then this empties, but nothing happens here. So I think that's a pretty good behavior. So we'll move on from here. All right, the next thing that I want to do is to give a way to save this value so that if I refresh, it stays as a value that it was currently in. By the way, let's update our counter to back to 0. I think 0 is more appropriate for the initial state. So what I want to do is, let's say I got to 107, and if I click refresh, or I exited the page and turned it back on, I want to still see 107. So the way that we are going to do this is with this local storage thing that comes built in with React. So, and by the way, this is where we're gonna use our second hook called the useEffect. So why don't we import that right now? useEffect. All right, so the way that we can use this is, what useEffect does is, if you guys are used to class-based components, this is your lifecycle methods, like component did mount, component did update, blah, blah, blah. However, for those that don't know about that, let me try my best to explain it to you. Let me first show you by doing this. useEffect takes in 2 arguments. The first one is a function. The second one is a dependencies, which will cause your useEffect hook to run again. I know that may be a little bit confusing, but let's just write this down and see what happens. So I'm gonna make the first one a function, anonymous function like so. And for our second parameter, it always takes in an array, and the stuff that you put inside this array is the thing that will cause the useEffect to fire again whenever the value inside here changes. So again, ignore it. We're gonna put an empty array for now, meaning it has no dependencies. And let's do this. Let's write console log hello. So notice this hello. But if I do anything, the hello doesn't fire again. So how do I make this hello fire every time I update my counter, for example? Then I put it within the dependencies, like so, within the array. Now, do you see this hello in the beginning? But whenever I do this, notice this number's going up. We keep on firing the function that was inside this first parameter of the useEffect. So that's how the useEffect works. The first one is a function that will always run in the beginning, no matter what. And then whatever you have put in the dependencies in this array here, like you could put more than other things, like so. If we do that, now whenever we update our input value, it says hello too, and for the counter as well. So the way that the stuff that you want, if a counter changes, if the value of the counter changes, or if the value of the input val changes, this will fire. Does that make sense? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Now we want to use this to kind of quote unquote save the value that was typed in here. So actually, before we do that, how about we do this? Yeah, we'll do that. Let's do this. Whenever the counter value updates, we want to save to our local storage the value of the counter. So the way that we do that is this: set local storage, which is built into React, and then set item. We will call our item just counter, and we will set it with the value of counter variable, our state here. Now I'm getting a little green squiggly line because typically the set item accepts a string, but our counter is a number. So you don't need to do this, but if you want to be very like precise with your typing, you could just convert this to a string like so. Now if I do this, right now we're at 11, right? I'm gonna go to my terminal here, my console here, and we're gonna do, let's do this local storage. Let's try getting the key of counter. Remember we called it counter here in this set item, the first parameter. So let's try getting that and see what we get. We get 11 as a string. So this is what it was doing. It's saving to our local storage the value in the counter variable. Now, if I refresh the page, unfortunately, we go back to 0 instead of 11. So the way that we do that is we have to define another useEffect. Make an arrow function, the first one parameter here. Let me just put a space here, that's bugging me. And the second one is a dependencies, but this one we want to only fire initially on node. So I'm not going to put anything in the dependencies. If you don't put anything inside this dependency array here, that means it will only run once at the very beginning when the component, quote unquote, what's called a mounts on the screen, when it renders on the screen. So what I want to do is when it renders on the screen is, let's get item of the counter. Okay. And I'm going to extract this out to a variable called const maybe counter from local storage, like so. Very verbose, whatever. Now, it may be that we have never set the item. Like let's say someone loads this app for the first time, right? It may be that they're, like for example, local storage. What if we call this variable not counter, but counter. We have nothing set there, hopefully. Whoops, what am I doing? Let's do local storage dot get item of counter. Then I get null because we've never set anything to counter. However, we did set something to counter, right? But it may be that when they first get on the page, they don't have this thing right here. So what we can do is if counter from local storage, if that exists. If it doesn't exist, we just get this null, right? So if that exists, what do we want to do? Set counter with counter from local storage. Now let's see if that works. So I'm going to, oh, now something's happening. Oh, by the way, why is this happening? Remember what I said? The counter from local storage is always a string type, right? So we got the exact same problem going on with this input val here. We got to convert this to a number. So how about we do this? We get the item and let's convert it to a number. So the way that we do that is we got to put this into this number function here that will convert it to a number. Now let's see if that works. 1111, and then it seems to work. So I'm gonna leave it at 4. Let's refresh the page and I still get 4. So that seems to work. Let's try that, refresh, and that also seems to work. So we have successfully added a save function to our counter. So that now whenever we type in a number and we get out of the page, I could even quit this, turn it back on, go back to localhost, and we get back our number 3 that was saved. All right, so now let's add a counter functionality down here. Let's add that button first, yeah? So let's go back to our return, make another div, and let's put a button, which we will call start counter, like so. So when we click this, we want first this to say stop counter, and we want the number to increment 1 by 1 every second. So let's make a function that we will associate with the non-click here, which I will call handle counter. How about that? Const handle counter. And what do we want to do here? How about this? I'm going to introduce a new state called const counter is live, and then set counter is live. This will be a Boolean, which I will default to initialize as false, and it will be true if the counter is running. So what I want to do is when I click the handle counter, I just want to set counter is live as the opposite of counter is live. So if it was true, it would turn false. If it was false, it would turn true. Let's see if that works. I mean, there's no way to really test it because there's no visual way that nothing visual changes, right? So what we can do is we could conditionally right here start or stop depending on our variable, our state of counter is live. So we will say, put a little curly brace here. If counter is live, if that is true, then we want this to say stop counter, otherwise say start counter. So let me just put a line here like so. And I'm getting an error here because I have to capitalize this L like that. Now let's see if that works. So start and stop. See, now that works. But now we want this to actually do something, right? So let's go back to our method. And this is an interesting thing. So what normally you would think that we would do something inside this method, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a useEffect. I'm going to use this useEffect hook. And let's just make one right here. This will fire every time our counter gets changed. I mean, not our counter is live variable gets changed. So I'm gonna put that here. And let's think about what happens here. This right now, let's just write console log, do something. So keep in mind that useEffects always run in the very beginning, right? So in the very beginning, when I refresh the page, we will always see this do something. It always fires in the beginning, which is not always ideal, but there's ways to get around that. But if I click this now, our variable changes, the counter is live, and that in turn makes this useEffect fire again. So this is how you use useEffect. You update a variable, and whenever that variable you want to do something, you put it inside the useEffect like so. So what we want to do is, if counter is live, then do something, right? If counter is not live anymore, maybe we could make like a function that stops the counter, but there's ways to get around that too. And now let's write console log, do something here. So notice initially our counter is live is false, right? So if I refresh the page now, I don't see the do something. However, if I start the counter, it says do something. If I stop it again, it doesn't see anything because this will only fire if the function will only run inside this if the counter is live is true. So this is how you kind of get around the fact that useEffects always run always in the beginning. If I didn't want the stuff inside the function to not run in the beginning, I just write if counter is live, then console log this, because counter is live is false in the beginning. All right, so what do we want to do here? Now there is this built-in JavaScript method function called setInterval. What we do is we pass it in a function and also the interval number in milliseconds about when you want that function to run constantly. So let's try using that here. Let's try setInterval. The first one is a function, and the second one is the number of milliseconds that you want this to run every time. I will say 1000 for 1 second. That's 1000 milliseconds. And within the output of our inner function, we will say, how about set counter? And we will say counter plus 1. Okay, so what this is, if everything is working, then what this will do is every second we will update our counter by 1. Now, I'm getting some yellow squiggly line here. It's saying it's missing a dependency of counter, and that is true. However, let's just ignore that for now. Let's just see what happens. I start the counter. Remember, it's at 3 right now. I start the counter, and it went to 4. That's good, but it stops going on. So what is going on? Did this interval just run only once and decide to quit? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write console log inside the interval, and let's just put the counter value next. Let's see what happens now. We're at 4 now. Let's start the counter. After 1 second, it says inside the interval 4, inside the interval 4, meaning our counter is never getting updated. Now, this is a little bit something that's kind of like a pain point of these set intervals or whatever. But pretty much, when we make this set interval, it gets a function here. And so when it creates this function, when it fires this function, it keeps track of what the counter variable was at that point in time when we define this set interval. And even though our counter within our app is getting updated, he doesn't know that. He only has reference to the old counter variable. That is why it's never getting updated. So the way that we negate this problem is, here's one way. What we do is we put the counter variable, like this WebStorm is telling me with this yellow squiggly line and this error here has a missing dependency. So what this will do now is whenever we start the counter, every second, because the counter variable is getting updated via him, we will get a new set interval. This will fire again, a set interval will get fired again. So we will have a new set interval. So a new function that will update the counter with this updated counter variable. But this will also be a problem. Let me just show you guys why. Let's save, let's refresh, and start the counter. Inside the interval 5 and inside the interval 6. But notice these other ones are getting called more than once. And look at this number here now. It's flickering. Hopefully you guys can see that. And now it's just getting on nonsense. So what is going on here? Well, the problem now is every second, because the counter is getting updated, we are declaring a new set interval. Every second, we are making a new function that runs in the background. Every second, we are making a new function, firing off a new function that runs in the background that will update our set counter. So as the time goes on, every second, we have something else in our memory. So this is a very bad way of doing things. So the one way to negate this is to use this function called, a built-in JavaScript function called clear interval. What that is essentially doing is we're telling JavaScript, like, look, we no longer need this set interval, clear it. So what we'll do is we'll make this into a variable, which we'll call timer interval, and set it equal to this set timer. And we will here return a function. Just bear with me. And within this return inline function, we will write clear interval, timer interval. So this looks very crazy, but whenever you return something from a useEffect, typically you want to return a function itself, like what I did here. This is a function with no parameters, just the output. What this is doing is when this re-renders again, before it re-renders, it will call this first, clear the old interval, and then when it starts running again, we will set a new interval so that we won't have this crazy duplicate thing going on here. Let's see what happens here if we do it like this. Start the counter, inside the interval, 21. Notice we're not getting duplicates, right? Everything's new. So this is how you can solve the issue of having like 1,000 intervals as the time goes on. However, because we're clearing the interval every single time, why are we even using the set interval in the first place? Because remember, set interval goes on forever until we actually clear the interval by using this function, right? But because we're clearing the interval after every second anyways, we're only making it run once. Instead of using a set interval, what we can do, let me just stop this for now. What we can do is, instead of using a set interval, let's just use set timeout. So set timeout will only run once after a set amount of seconds, which we say 1,000. And then, because we don't need to clear anymore, because it only run once, we don't need that. We also don't need this const variable here. Let's refresh the page. Now let's see what happens. And we get the same desired outcome. So let's erase the console log, get rid of that. And let's see if it saves. I'm gonna start the counter. It goes to 76, 77, 78, 79, stop the counter. And it stops. And when I refresh the page, we still are left with 80. All right, so that concludes this tutorial. I think this was a good introductory dive to useEffect and useState hooks. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. If you guys like my content, please subscribe below. And if you have any feedback, please let me know in the comment section below. I'll be sure to read them and give you a response. Guys, anyways, if you like my content, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.